everyone, it's Pavlina from the Pavlina Show, and I am on the phone with singer and songwriter and author of the Toni Tennille, a memoir. It's Toni Tennille. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Pavlina. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me. This is going to be a lot of fun. I really enjoyed your memoir, so I can't wait to talk about it.
Thank you.
I never knew that you had a finger that was injured and you had, multiple surgeries. Were you ever self-conscious about that in the past?
Oh, are you kidding? I was self-conscious about it constantly. I lost the right index finger from the knuckle on to the end, the tip of it actually, in an accident when I was 5 years old. A wheelbarrow fell on it when I was tiny and caused gangrene, and eventually I lost it. But my parents really, really wanted me to be able to play piano, which had been my dream, when I was a little kid. And they rounded up one of the best plastic surgeons of the day, who happened to be in New Orleans at the time. And we would drive to New Orleans several times over the course of several years while the finger was rebuilt to the best of their ability. I'm sure they could do it much better now, but this was, 1946, 47, 48, 49, for several years it took to get it repaired. During the time that it was being, worked on and created, it went through stages where it just was the ugliest thing you ever saw. And of course, kids are terrible. Kids tease you all the time, and I just was so uncomfortable and about it, and tried to hide it. And over the years, I perfected a way of kind of distracting people from that finger. But the point was that because of my parents' financial sacrifice, which I now realize must have been huge, I was able to study classical piano for 10 years and become a pretty good pianist.
Yeah, that's amazing. They were so supportive. I could definitely see where growing up that would be really challenging, because kids are very mean sometimes. So.
Oh, they definitely are. They definitely are, and it was very hard on me. Even my best friends, would kind of cringe. But now it doesn't have a nail and it doesn't have a joint, and it's shorter than it should be, but it's definitely long enough to, I was able to play pretty well with that.
I know. If you can play piano, then really, who cares, So you mentioned...
Exactly.
Yeah, so you mentioned you got music from your dad, and then perfection and holding in your emotions from your mom. Do you think once you got successful, had a Grammy, you were married to Daryl, you had fans, do you think that your life was wholesome and perfect, or...?
Well, no, I think that's what fans thought, and that's what I hoped for. But, I never went into this music thing looking for fame. Fame came because we just happened to be at the right place in the right time. But I did it just because I loved the music so much. And, Daryl was a brilliant producer, record producer. And I think I was the most creative I've ever been when I was working with him and writing songs, during that period.
Who do you think your life most parallels, your mom or your dad, and why?
That's so hard for me to judge, but I would definitely say my father had the biggest influence on me musically, because he was a big band singer in the late 1930s, when he was a young, handsome, carefree guy on the road with Bob Crosby and his Bobcats, which was a famous orchestra of the day. And he was the one who taught me basically all the songs that I learned and know of the Great American Songbook all those years, when I was growing up. He would get me and my sister Jane into the room where the hi-fi was at the time, and he would say, "Wait till you hear this record by," and it would be Count Basie, or it would be, the great Ella Fitzgerald, or somebody like that. And I owe him, that education I got in that kind of music from him. And with my mother, she was had one of the first ever television talk shows in the country in the 1950s. And I grew up watching her, interview people 5 days a week, half an hour every day, live. There was no taping then. If you made a mistake, oh well, you just said, oh, excuse me, and you kept going.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful watching her and learning from her.
Yeah, that must have been amazing. So growing up, listening to records with your sister, and then later on being at an Army base and listening to Neil Sedaka and Brenda Lee, both of who I interviewed, and I love both of them a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're just the best. So did you somehow, see your life somehow, just like preparing you for this moment, all of that, and it was preparing you for what you would end up doing?
No, I had no idea I would ever achieve what I did achieve. I just loved music, and I would listen and learn from all kinds of music. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Neil, because he has been such a wonderful friend ever since we met him, when we recorded Love Will Keep Us Together. And in fact, I had a lovely conversation with him when Caroline and I were in New York at the end of April, or the beginning of April. And, we used to see each other all the time when he would fly into Lake Tahoe when Daryl and I lived there and work at Harris, and we'd always meet for dinner at night when he was there. So he's just been a wonderful, supportive, good friend, and I just love him.
So another thing that you discussed in your book that I just thought was really funny was the worst diet ever, and it had to be the grapefruit diet. Would you ever try that? Would you ever try that again?
Well, would I ever do that again?
Yeah.
Never. That was Daryl. When people read the book, they'll understand that Daryl has always been, a bit of a hypochondriac. He's always worried about his health, and he's been a health food fanatic ever since I met him. And, he would say, oh, I can't eat that because that's a negative food, or I can't eat that because it'll do this or that. Or anyway, he decided we had a gig book. This before we ever had any hits, and we were just working, in clubs in the LA area, and we got a gig at a place called Apple Valley Inn. That was a 3-week-long gig, and Daryl said, well, this is perfect, because while we're there for those 3 weeks, we're going to do the 21-day grapefruit diet.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, what is that, and what's it for? And he said, well, if we eat nothing but grapefruits for 21 days, it will fix our genes, and we won't have any of the bad genes that we might have inherited, from our parents. And I was thinking, I like my genes, but okay. So I went along with it, and before I did, I said, look, I don't like white grapefruit. How about pink grapefruit? He said, no, it has to be white grapefruit. So by the time we were into our second week, I was about to die. I was eating as many grapefruits as I could to try to get, the energy I needed to do, 9 to 1 in the morning every night while we were there, singing and talking to the audience and playing and all that kind of stuff. And finally, he kept it up through to the end, but I have to confess, one day I wandered into the kitchen there at the Apple Valley Inn and got into a bowl of rolls that tasted like heaven to me after grapefruits all that time.
Oh my gosh, I bet. I don't know how you guys could have done that. It just sounds impossible to me, but, especially white grapefruits, like the pink ones are obviously the better ones, so...
Oh, of course, they taste better, so therefore they must not be as good for you. This is Daryl's thinking.
Oh, of course.
Of course. Of course.
So you were the first girl in the band for the Beach Boys, which that must have been just so amazing. So what was that like?
Well, it was a wonderful experience, and I only got the job because Carl Wilson had called Daryl. Daryl had been playing backup for them for 5 or 6 years at the time that I had met him. But Carl Wilson called Daryl and said, hey, look, we're losing our acoustic piano player while he's going to stop and finish getting his degree at UCLA, so we need somebody to fill in until he comes back. And Daryl said, well, I've got this gal that I'm working with that, I know can do it. And Carl said, well, fine. We'll see you on the plane. I mean, he never heard me audition. He just was taking Daryl's word for it, which I thought was pretty wonderful. Plus the fact that he didn't seem to care that I was a girl. And it was the Beach Boys, and no girl had ever been in their backup band. And the first time he heard me play was the first sound check I did with the Beach Boys in Binghamton, New York. And, I passed the test and went on and toured with them, off and on during that time that the other guy was out. But it was funny because, I go to get up on stage when it was that time to get ready for the show, and the security guys in all these different cities would say, "I'm sorry, miss, but you can't get up here. This is just for the band." And I'd say the old adage, "I'm with the band." And he'd say, "Well, yeah, sure you are." And, of course, I was with the band, but eventually I got the road manager to go to all these security people when we got to a new city and say, "Yes, Toni Tennille is our keyboard, our acoustic pianist, so please let her get up on stage." It was really a hoot.
Oh, my gosh, that is crazy. That must have been so many wonderful experiences. So
it was, and the very first rock concert I'd ever been to was when I was on stage playing with the Beach Boys. And I really was not prepared for how loud it was up there. And Daryl forgot to tell me that I should wear earplugs. So when the concert was over, I felt like I was hearing underwater. And I said, "Daryl, my ears, what's going on?" He said, "Well, you should have worn earplugs."
Oh my
and I said, "Well, thanks for telling me. I didn't know about that, but it was okay,
Yeah,
we got through it."
I remember reading that in your story, and I was like, I can't believe he didn't tell you. Like, oh my gosh.
Well, he just didn't think that it was a problem for me. That was just him.
Yeah, but one of my favorite songs, just in general, is "I Am Woman" by Helen Reddy. So tell me why you never sang Helen Reddy, her song "I Am Woman," when you and Daryl were performing in like the smokehouses.
That is so hard to explain. I just didn't like the line, "Hear me roar."
Okay.
That just bothered me somehow. I'm a lyricist and songwriter myself, and I just didn't like "I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar." It had nothing to do with her. She was a wonderful singer. It just wasn't one of my favorites. That's, I just think maybe if there had been another song about women and how, empowering they should be and empowered they finally became, as we now see with our first woman nominated for a president by a major party. I just thought there could have been a better song for me.
Yeah,
that was
definitely.
my only thing.
Okay, I understand that, definitely. So you weren't married when you guys had your first big hit on radio. Do That to Me One More Time. But your PR people, like, quote unquote, married you, for the public. But Daryl never proposed or said, "I love you." That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I was still trying to find out where I actually stood with him. We were living together at that time, and actually it was Love Will Keep Us Together that was our first hit. And it started climbing the charts in November of 1974, and then became the song of the summer in 1975 when it hit number one and stayed there for weeks. But we weren't married, and I think the people that were most concerned about it were our record company, A&M, who thought, because people thought we were married, they just implied that we were married, inferred that we were married, which we really weren't. And my mother, an old-fashioned Southern lady who kept saying to me, "Toni, when are you and Daryl going to get married?" And so finally we actually got married because our accountant said to us, "You're making a lot of money now, and you could be better off with your taxes if you got married." And that was the romantic reason we finally flew up to northern Nevada and got married in Virginia City.
Wow, oh my gosh. But you guys even had separate bedrooms, right?
We did. I mean, that's not to say that we didn't have a sexual relationship, which we did, but it was, I'm not going to go into more detail, but one of the main reasons why we maintained our own rooms throughout our career was because we worked together all the time, and we each needed some separate space. And plus, Daryl was a radio person, and he would listen until the wee hours of the morning to the radio, and he would listen to mostly conspiracy theory radio type shows, which I couldn't stand. and I like to read, and so that was one way we could calm down and go to sleep, being, apart from each other.
Yeah, okay, I get that, definitely. So the image of Captain and Tennille, you with your famous hairstyle, Daryl with his captain hat, your bulldogs, which are just adorable, by the way. So everyone, thought you guys had this wholesome, happy image that you were talking about earlier, but privately, how did you feel about your guys' image?
Well, nobody likes no artist likes to hear that although people love them and people did love us and love our music, that we were wholesome, which kind of implies that there's no depth or quality to the music that we did. And there was indeed a lot more depth. They kind of put you in a category that says, okay, you're this, and you're not hip, and you're never going to be. So, we kind of had to accept that. That personality that I have is me. That's just the way I am. And Daryl is just the way he is. In fact, on our television show, that was Daryl. He wasn't creating a character. That's just the way he was. And it came out that, people were intrigued by him, just as I was, really. They couldn't figure him out, and it created a kind of character that I guess some people thought was made up, but it wasn't. That was just Daryl. He was awkward and uncomfortable on television because he'd never had any experience, performing. He was the background player, and that's what he preferred. He liked to be in the background, playing the keyboards, and letting me or whoever he was working with before me be the singer and talk to the audience. So when we had our television show, he had to stand up and be next to me and be the other star. And I had years of theater and singing in front of people and all that kind of stuff, and television experience, and he hadn't.
Yeah.
So he was uncomfortable, and this awkwardness was real.
I know, and I guess he didn't like the hat jokes, right? He wasn't crazy about that part?
No, and the writers had a really hard time coming up with things for him to do, because he was not good if he had to read a cue card or memorize a script. He did best if he could kind of improvise. The writers were used to writing for people who were used to doing scripted skits, and not the ones that are, that you improvise so much. And so, he was just extremely uncomfortable doing those things, and they came up with this idea of the hat jokes, which actually were so awkward they were funny. What was one of the ones that Daryl used to do? Can leap tall buildings in a single bound and dresses in blue and red and Captain Hat or something, Super Hat or something he was come up with. It was stupid, but, people would laugh at it. It was funny in its own way.
Yeah, that's great though. Oh my gosh. But okay, so I'm 18, so I think it's obviously hard for me to relate to staying in a marriage for so long, because you guys were married for over 30 years. And I understand why you did it. You loved Daryl, but why did he stay in the marriage? I did.
Well, I think he stayed in, Pavlina, because he loved working with me as a musician and a singer. One thing I always knew about Daryl was that he thought I was a great singer and a really fine songwriter. And whenever I would write something new and would play it for him, he'd just grab it and go in the studio and make a wonderful recording out of it. So we kind of sparked each other's creativity that way. And I think that's what meant the most to him of being with me, was that.
Now, performing at the White House, that must have been so epic. Like, that must have been so cool. And one of the really funny things I'd love for you to tell me about is the Muskrat Love song. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, Muskrat Love was the third biggest hit single we ever had, the third biggest selling hit single we ever had. And it was written by a guy from Texas named Willis Allen Ramsey. I didn't write it, so you can't blame me for that. The funny thing about Muskrat Love is that throughout our career, it has been people either loved it or they loathed it. There was no in between. And I just thought it was hysterically funny, the controversy that it caused, because when we first heard the song, it was actually recorded before us by a group called America. And I heard their version of it when Daryl and I were driving to the smokehouse where we were working, one of the last clubs we worked in before we had our first hits. And I listened to it and I said, Daryl, I think this is a song about muskrats and something about them being in love. I said, let's go find the music, because if it's as funny as I think it is, we should work it up and try it out in the club. So next day, found the lyrics, and they made me laugh out loud. And I said, let's work this up and see what happens if the smokehouse audience likes it. Well, they loved it. They flipped over it. And they were requesting it constantly, and I finally had to limit it to twice a night, because I just don't want to do nothing but play Muskrat Love all night long. So when we were putting together our second album for A&M, I thought, well, they loved it in the smokehouse. Why not just put it on this album and see what happens? Well, to make a long story short, it ended up being a huge hit for us off of that album. But when we sang it in the White House, which was probably the most infamous thing we ever did, we hadn't had it out as a hit. All we had at that time were the Love Will Keep Us Together and the one I wrote, The Way I Want to Touch You, which were both, the gold records for us. But we thought, they liked it in the smokehouse, and, smokehouse, White House, what's the difference? I mean, they're all regular people, and the President and Mrs. Ford were just such lovely people. They were the ones that invited us there for the bicentennial year of 1976, in July of 1976. And we actually did that song at the White House, and it's a long story. I tell it better in the book probably than I'm telling you, but I remember sitting there. I was playing electric piano at the time, and we were in the East Room of the White House, which was very small room, and in the front row were President and Mrs. Ford and Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, who were their guests for the bicentennial, the Prime Minister of England and his wife, and right opposite me was Henry Kissinger and his wife. And the minute I started singing that song, I looked right directly at Henry Kissinger and immediately knew that he was not amused, that he didn't get it. He hated the song. And I remember, singing it and looking at him, and he crossed his arms over his chest like, what is this dreck I'm being forced to listen to? And anyway, by the time we finished our little concert, everybody came up, including the Queen and Prince Philip and President and Mrs. Ford and Henry. I never saw him again. He got out of that room as fast as he could. But I got my revenge on Henry, because ever after that, every time I sang Muskrat Love in any concert, I always dedicated it to him. So I don't know if he has any idea of his association with those darned muskrats, but I think it would be funny if he did.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, so, after all of your amazing experiences, going across the country, everything, you're now living in Florida. Is this like the best time of your life, or how are you enjoying it right now?
I am loving every minute of it. I'm finally living just a mile and a half from my sister Jane. I have 3 wonderful sisters, and Jane is the closest in age to me. And I talk about her a lot in the book, so people who've read the book understand how close we've always been, even though we've lived far apart. I'm now living close to her, and, I can call her up and say, hey, why don't we meet at, Panera for lunch today? And I can go meet with her. Most of my life I've lived in the West near my 2 younger sisters, but not as close to Jane. So it's really a joy for me to be there with her, and also to live only 20 minutes from my co-author, my niece Caroline, Jane's youngest daughter. So And of course, it's back to the South again. I was born and raised in Alabama, and it's just coming back to a Southern style of living, and I'm enjoying every minute of it, Pavlina.
That is so amazing. I'm from Florida, so I totally understand. Thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Pavlina. It was great to talk to you, too.